He used my money to fund his second family. Every hotel room, every dinner, every gift, charged to our joint card. And I didn't find out until the bank called me about an overdraft. I know that sounds insane, but it happened. And when it did, something inside me just snapped. I'm glad you're here. Because I need to tell this story, not for pity, but because silence almost destroyed me. Maybe if you're listening right now, you'll recognize the same signs I ignored for years. Let me start at the beginning. It wasn't always chaos. Once, I believed I had a normal life. A husband who worked hard, 2 kids who adored him, and a modest home that we'd built together, brick by dream. I used to sit on the porch every evening, coffee in hand, waiting for the sound of his car in the driveway. That sound meant stability. It meant everything was okay, or so I thought. Back then, we lived in Raleigh, North Carolina. Our life wasn't fancy, but it was comfortable. He worked as a regional sales manager for a construction company, which meant frequent travel, or so he said. I worked part-time as a school secretary, juggling schedules, bills, and the endless laundry mountain 2 growing kids create. Our finances were a shared responsibility. We had one joint account. Both of our paychecks went in, and everything came out of it. Groceries, mortgage, savings, even the kids' future college fund. It was a system that worked until it didn't. Looking back now, I realize how many times I brushed off small inconsistencies, the client dinners that didn't appear on his work calendar, the late-night calls that made him step outside, the cologne I didn't recognize when he came home. But when you love someone, you build explanations to protect the image you need to survive. And I was queen of justification. He was tired, I'd tell myself. He was under pressure, I'd say. He just needed space, I'd insist. I'd say anything to keep my little world from collapsing. Still, even in my denial, something about his late nights gnawed at me. Sometimes he'd say he was in Charlotte for a meeting, but I'd see his car mileage didn't quite match up. Sometimes his receipts were missing, but his suit smelled faintly of hotel air freshener. One night I even teased him. I said, "You travel so much, you should start earning frequent flyer miles." He just smiled and said, "Maybe I already do." At the time, I thought it was a joke. Now that sentence haunts me. The night everything began to unravel was quiet. Too quiet. It was late October. Cold enough that I could see my breath when I stepped out to bring in the trash. Our neighborhood was still, only porch lights flickering. Inside, the kids were asleep, and I was sorting bills at the kitchen table, just trying to make sure everything lined up before payday. Then I saw it. Our joint credit card statement had arrived in the mail, earlier than usual. I don't know why I opened it that night. Usually, he handled the credit card payments. But something in me, some quiet whisper I couldn't ignore, made me tear the envelope open. At first, it looked normal. Gas, groceries, utility payments, then hotel names started showing up. Hilton, Hyatt, Fairfield Inn. And then again, Hyatt, over and over. Each one on a weekend he was supposedly working late. The charges weren't small either, $486. $672, $120, and the dates, oh, they lined up perfectly with the weekends he said he was visiting his sick mother in Asheville. For a second, I told myself maybe he was booking for clients. But then I noticed something else. The billing location. Not Asheville, not Charlotte. Savannah, Georgia, 5 hours away. A place neither of us had any reason to go. My stomach twisted. I went cold. I rechecked every line, every date. I grabbed my laptop, logged into the bank portal, and scrolled through months of transactions I'd ignored. There it was again. Restaurant charges, jewelry store payments, online flower deliveries. All of it on the same weekends. All of it paid from the card we both used. The card tied to my paycheck. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. I wanted to wake him up right then, shove the statement in his face. But I just sat there, frozen, because in that moment the realization didn't come as rage. It came as grief. I was mourning a marriage that had died long before I noticed. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the kitchen table until the sky turned gray, listening to the refrigerator hum and my thoughts race. The kids came down for breakfast and I forced a smile, acting normal. But something had shifted inside me forever. I didn't know the full truth yet. Not then. But I knew one thing. His late nights weren't late nights at all. They were getaways, and I was the one funding every single one. That realization was enough to light a quiet fire in my chest. Not loud, not wild, but steady. A flame that whispered, "Find out everything," and I would, even if it meant burning down every illusion I'd ever built about love. Before everything broke, I really thought we had it all together. Not rich, not fancy, but stable. We'd been married for 12 years, and I used to believe we understood each other without even speaking. We met in our 20s, back when everything felt possible. He had ambition, I had patience. He made promises, and I believed in every one of them. In those early years, he used to bring me little surprises, a gas station coffee when I was tired, a flower from the parking lot, a note on the bathroom mirror that said, "We got this." That's what I remember most, the small things, the easy laughter, the teamwork. The way we'd stay up talking about the kids we'd have, the house we'd buy, the vacations we couldn't afford but planned anyway. And for a while, we actually built that life. We bought a modest 3-bedroom home in a quiet cul-de-sac. The neighbors were kind, the schools were good, and we felt like one of those families people envy for their simplicity. We had 2 kids, Maya, our curious 10-year-old, and Eli, our gentle little boy who still believed his daddy hung the moon. Most evenings followed the same rhythm. Dinner at 6, homework, then family TV time. Sometimes I'd wait on the couch while he played with the kids. Other nights, we'd just sit together after bedtime, both too tired to talk but comforted by each other's presence. That was our normal. It wasn't glamorous, but it was ours. Money was always tight, though. Between bills, the mortgage, and saving for college, we had to watch every dollar. That's why we had a shared budget system. Every expense went on the same card, every purchase tracked in one spreadsheet I managed. He'd always joke, "You're the CFO of this family." And I'd laugh because, honestly, it was true. I handled the details. He handled the big stuff. At least, that's what I thought. His job had always involved travel. A few days here and there, sometimes longer trips to meet clients. He'd come home with stories, hotel pens, and the occasional souvenir for the kids. I never doubted him. I'd ask how the meetings went, and he'd say, "Productive but exhausting." And that was that. But lately, there'd been subtle changes. At first, so small you'd barely notice them. He started keeping his phone face down on the table. Not always, just enough for it to feel off. He used to hand it to me freely, asking me to text his assistant or check directions. Now, if I even glanced at it, he'd casually move it away, like it was just instinct. Then came the cologne. A new one. I noticed it one Sunday morning when he hugged me before leaving for a meeting. It wasn't the woody, musky scent he'd always worn. This one was sweeter, lighter, something that didn't belong to him. When I asked, he said, "Sample from the airport," and I believed him. Or rather, I chose to believe him. He started staying later at work, too. "Quarterly reports," he said. "New client push." Always with just enough detail to sound convincing. And when he got home, he'd look emotionally absent. He'd eat dinner quietly, scroll his phone, kiss the kids goodnight, then take a long shower. I'd ask if something was wrong, and he'd say, "Just tired, babe." That word, babe, started to sound mechanical, like it was rehearsed. Like he was saying it out of obligation, not affection. Still, I kept my routine. Breakfasts, lunches, carpool. I told myself marriage had phases. Some close, some distant. I didn't want to be the paranoid wife snooping through her husband's life. So I ignored the signs one by one until ignoring them became habit. I think deep down, I knew something was off. But you can't confront what you're not ready to lose. And I wasn't ready to lose my family. There was one night, though, that still sticks with me. He came home unusually late and almost midnight. The kids were asleep, and I was in bed reading. When I heard the door open, I pretended to be half asleep. He kissed my forehead, then went straight to the bathroom. I remember hearing his phone buzz, then a long silence. Curiosity got the better of me. When he came to bed, his phone was charging on his nightstand. The screen lit up once, just for a second, and I saw a preview. Had such a wonderful time. Can't wait to see you again. No name. Just a heart emoji. I froze. But before I could process it, he rolled over, face to the wall, and fell asleep. Or pretended to. I didn't ask him the next morning. I wanted to, but I didn't, because the moment you ask that kind of question, you can't unask it. You open a door that can't be closed again, so I made his coffee, packed the kids' lunches, and told myself, maybe it was a work text, maybe a friend joking around, maybe anything else. But denial has a time limit, and mine was running out, because when you start noticing the lies, even the walls in your home seem to whisper. The distance between you grows louder than words. And one day you wake up realizing you're not living with your husband anymore. You're living with a stranger wearing his face. Still, I tried to hold things together. I told myself maybe a vacation would help. Maybe he was stressed. Maybe we just needed time. So I started planning a family trip. Something small, affordable, a reset. But when I brought it up, he said, not now. Work's too crazy. And when I asked when he'd be free, he said, don't worry about it. That phrase, don't worry about it, was the final nail in the coffin of my comfort, because that's when I realized. He'd already stopped including me in his plans, and the very next week I'd find proof that my gut had been right all along. It started on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon, the kind that feels too plain to change your life. I was sitting at the kitchen table, laptop open, paying bills. It's a routine I've done for years. Log in, check balances, clear statements, move on. But that day, the numbers didn't add up. I remember staring at the credit card balance, blinking twice because I thought I'd misread it. The total was hundreds higher than it should have been. Not once, but twice that month. I scrolled down the transactions, expecting to see something simple. A double charge, a kid's expense, maybe something from Amazon I forgot about. Then I saw it. Marriott Bonvoy, $430.67. I frowned. We hadn't stayed at a hotel in months. The last trip we took was to visit my mom for Christmas, and that was 6 months ago. Maybe it was a business trip, I thought. But then, why was it on our joint card? His company always covered those expenses. I clicked for details. Location, Atlanta, Georgia. 3 nights. Room service included, Atlanta. That wasn't even one of his work regions. I remember sitting back in my chair, my stomach tightening. My first instinct wasn't anger, it was confusion. The kind of confusion that makes you talk out loud even when you're alone. Why would he use our card? I whispered to no one. The rest of the charges told their own story. A restaurant called The Garden House, 126ers. Bloom Florist. 54 Uber Comfort, multiple trips. It looked like someone's vacation, not a business trip. I scrolled further, and my hands started to shake when I noticed the pattern. Every month, around the same week, there were hotel charges. Different cities, same card. All under $500, small enough to escape attention, but frequent enough to be deliberate. And that's when the noise in my head started. That loud, quiet storm that comes when you realize the world might be lying to you. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I opened my phone and texted him. Hey, just checking. Did your company stop covering travel expenses? He replied 3 hours later. Nah, why? I stared at that why. Longer than I should have. The word looked harmless, innocent. But something in me twisted. So I said, just saw a few charges from hotels. Thought it might be work-related. He responded almost instantly this time. Oh yeah. They had me book through my card first, then they'll reimburse. Don't stress it. Don't stress it. There it was again. That same tone he used when he didn't want me to look closer. I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to so badly. But my chest felt heavy. And when I checked the calendar, I realized those business trips lined up perfectly with the weekends he claimed to have corporate conferences. I didn't sleep much that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself I was overreacting. That maybe he really was being reimbursed. That maybe the receipts just hadn't come through yet. But the next day, when he got home, something in his demeanor made me pause. He kissed me on the cheek like always. Same casual affection. But his suitcase looked newer. A dark gray roller bag I didn't recognize. When I asked where the old one was, he said, "It broke. Got this one on sale at the airport." Simple explanation. Logical even. But I couldn't help noticing the faint floral scent clinging to it. It wasn't mine. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat in the living room scrolling through our bank app again. Same pattern, same charges, and suddenly, something in me clicked. I opened my email and searched for Marriott Bonvoy. Sure enough, there were the automated confirmation emails. Room booked under his name. Dates matching the card transactions. And one tiny mistake he hadn't thought of. Because it was our joint card, the booking confirmations were CC'd to my email too. Just buried under promotions and bank updates. That's how I found the last one. Dated just 2 weeks ago. I clicked it open. The reservation name was his, but the room guest? A woman named Samantha L.I. Remember my breath catching in my throat. It felt like time slowed down, like every sound in the house faded except the blood rushing in my ears. Samantha. That name meant nothing to me. And yet everything, all at once. Because in that second I knew. He hadn't just lied about money. He'd used our life, our savings, our children's future, to fund someone else's comfort. I sat there shaking, staring at the screen, my eyes stinging. The rage didn't come yet, only disbelief. Because how could a man share a bed with you, share children with you, and still choose to build a secret life miles away? I opened Facebook, typed her name, and there she was. Profile picture, smiling, holding a baby. The baby looked about a year old. Her bio said Atlanta. Her posts? Family outings, dinners. A man in the background of one photo. His back turned, but familiar. It was him. Same shoulders. The watch I'd given him last Christmas. I closed the laptop so hard the sound made me flinch. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't cry yet either. I just sat there, gripping the edge of the table, realizing that my entire marriage had a second address. For the next 2 days, I moved like a ghost. Made breakfast. Smiled at the kids. Laughed at jokes that didn't land. And every time he called to say he'd be working late, I heard the words for what they really were. A code for another life I wasn't part of. The denial finally broke when he left for another trip. This time, I watched him pack. I saw the new shirt, one I hadn't bought, and the faint lipstick mark on his collar he thought he'd hidden. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, kissed him goodbye, and said, "Travel safe." But inside, I made a promise to myself. The next time he took one of those trips, I wouldn't be at home waiting. I'd be watching. And when I found the proof, I wouldn't just confront him. I'd make sure his entire world knew exactly who he really was. I didn't have to wait long for the next trip. 2 weeks later, he told me he'd be heading to Nashville for a weekend client retreat. He kissed my forehead before leaving, like always. Said he'd call every night. He packed his new gray suitcase, wore his travel polo, and tossed his toiletry bag in the trunk of his car. I stood at the door, waving goodbye, and as soon as his car turned the corner, I felt my entire body drop the act. My hands were shaking, but my mind had never been clearer. This time, I wasn't going to sit at home waiting. I'd already done my homework. 3 nights before, while he was in the shower, I'd taken photos of his travel itinerary from his email. He always left his phone on the counter, unlocked. He trusted me too much. The hotel name was right there, Marriott Downtown Nashville. Check-in, Friday evening. Check-out, Monday morning, same hotel chain. Same 3-night pattern. Same ghost story I was about to step into. That Friday afternoon, I packed a bag of my own. Not much, just a change of clothes, my camera, and a notebook. I told the kids I'd be visiting my sister for the weekend. They didn't need to know the truth. Not yet. I drove 6 hours straight, the same route he must have taken a dozen times. Every mile felt like a heartbeat, pounding louder the closer I got. By the time I reached Nashville, it was almost 7 p.m. I parked across the street from the hotel, hands gripping the steering wheel so tight I could feel my pulse through my fingers. And then I saw him. He stepped out of the sliding glass doors, phone pressed to his ear, laughing. He was wearing the shirt I bought him for our anniversary, the one he said he didn't like anymore. Beside him walked a woman, Same build as the Facebook photos. Same hair color. She was pushing a stroller. And then I saw it. The stroller wasn't empty. A baby boy sat inside, wearing a tiny red hat. He reached for my husband's finger. And my husband, the man who'd missed our daughter's school recital because of a conference call, bent down, kissed that child's forehead, and whispered something that made her laugh. I swear my entire world tilted in that moment. The breath left my lungs. I couldn't cry. Couldn't even blink. All I could do was watch. I took out my phone and pressed record. I don't know why. Maybe I needed proof for myself, to remind me later that I hadn't imagined it, because the scene in front of me looked like something from a dream, or a nightmare dressed as domestic peace. He looked relaxed, the kind of happy I hadn't seen on his face in years. I watched as he leaned over, unlocked the car, and loaded the stroller in the back. Then he wrapped his arm around her waist, the same way he used to with me. They drove off. I followed at a distance. They went to a cozy restaurant on 4th Avenue, the Garden House. Yes, the same name from our credit card bill. I parked across the street and sat there for nearly an hour, staring through the window. They were seated near the corner. She reached across the table, brushed a crumb off his lip. He smiled at her like she was the only person in the world. That's when it hit me. He wasn't having a fling. He had another life. Dinner ended. They left hand in hand. He opened the car door for her, loaded the baby seat, and drove to the hotel. Room 412. I knew because I followed them into the lobby, staying far enough behind to avoid being seen. He handed his ID to the front desk. I heard his voice clearly when he said, "Checking in. Lewis, reservation for 3 nights." The clerk smiled. Samantha cooed the baby. And then, like a cruel twist of fate, the clerk printed the receipt and set it on the counter. I leaned just enough to read the card number. The last 4 digits were ours. That's when the anger finally came. It didn't arrive loud or explosive. It came quiet, heavy, like heat beneath ice. I walked out of that hotel and sat in my car until midnight, staring at the building, trying to process it all. He had used our credit card. My name. Our children's college savings. All for her, for them. That night I called my bank. I froze the joint account. I told them I'd lost the card and needed a replacement. They didn't ask questions. The next morning, I drove home before sunrise. The kids were still asleep when I walked in. I stood by their door and watched them breathe. And for the first time, I realized just how much he'd taken from us without ever touching our wallets. He'd stolen peace. He'd stolen time. He'd stolen trust. When he came home that Monday night, he walked in like nothing had happened. Kissed my cheek, dropped his bag, and said, "You wouldn't believe how boring that conference was." I almost laughed. Almost. But instead, I said softly, "I'm sure it was." He didn't notice my tone. He didn't notice how calm I was, because in his mind he was still in control. But inside me, something had changed. The confusion was gone. The fear was gone. What remained was clarity, and a cold, calculated calm. He had no idea that while he was living his double life, I had already started building a new one, a life without him, and I knew exactly how I was going to end his little fantasy. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg. I wasn't even going to cry. I was going to make him face himself. I went to bed that night knowing I had the truth. Photos, videos, receipts, and recordings. Evidence strong enough to end our marriage and expose his secret world. But before I confronted him, I wanted one thing. I wanted to see how far he'd go, how easily he could lie to my face. So the next morning, over coffee, I asked, "How was the hotel this time?" He smiled, sipped, and said, "Fine, same old Marriott." That's when I smiled too. But mine was different, because I knew something he didn't. The Marriott security camera had captured him holding a baby. The timestamp matched our credit card statement. The truth wasn't just mine anymore. It was documented, recorded, undeniable. And soon, everyone he'd ever lied to would know exactly who he really was. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake next to him, listening to the rhythm of his breathing. Steady, peaceful, fake. He looked like a man who had everything under control. A good job, a comfortable home, a trusting wife. But under that, illusion. His whole world was already cracking, and I was the one holding the hammer. I realized something important. I didn't want to scream or destroy him in a fit of rage. I wanted him to feel what I had felt. Confusion, fear, exposure. I wanted him to experience the same helplessness I'd endured every time he'd said, "Trust me." So I started planning, quietly, carefully. The next morning, I woke up before dawn. While he showered, I slipped into the office room and printed every single piece of evidence I'd gathered. Hotel receipts, screenshots, credit card statements, and stills from the video I recorded outside the Nashville Marriott. Then I went through our joint laptop, the one we used for bills and taxes. I searched his email folders. He'd been careless. There were flight confirmations, hotel reward points, and even Uber receipts, all leading to the same city, same weekends, same woman. I created a separate folder named Tax Info 2023, something he'd never think twice about, and saved everything there. Then I uploaded the entire file to a private cloud drive under my name. Every digital trail was now mine. But revenge alone wasn't enough. I needed protection, for me, for our kids, for our future. So I made my second call, to a lawyer. Her name was Karen. She was calm, efficient, and didn't need me to explain twice. When I told her what I'd found, she simply said, "Good. Keep gathering. Don't confront him yet. We'll build quietly." Her tone reminded me of my old self, the version of me that used to run our home like clockwork. For the first time in months, maybe years, I felt steady. That evening, I watched him play with our daughter in the living room. He was on the floor, helping her build a Lego castle. He laughed as a piece broke, looked up, and smiled at me. For a moment, I almost pitied him. He didn't know the walls were closing in. He didn't realize that by the end of the month, the house, the accounts, even his reputation, would slip from his hands. But then I remembered the stroller, the baby's hat, the way he kissed that child's forehead, and all sympathy disappeared. I began moving money, slowly, strategically. Every week, I transferred small amounts from our joint account into my personal savings. Not enough to raise suspicion, but enough to create a safety cushion. I opened a new checking account under my maiden name. Then I redirected my paycheck there. When he noticed the missing deposits a week later, he said, "Honey, payroll seems off. You want me to call HR?" I smiled. Already handled. He didn't press further, because when men think they're winning, they stop looking for clues. By the third week, I had gathered everything Karen needed. She drafted the divorce paperwork, attached the financial records, and prepared the custody motion. But before I signed, I wanted one last move, the kind that would make him realize that lies, once exposed, never go quietly. So I sent an email, not to him, but to her. The subject line was simple: "Do you know who's paying for your weekends?" Side. I attached screenshots of the receipts, the video stills, and a photo of our family at last year's Thanksgiving dinner, the one he'd missed because of a conference. Within minutes, I saw the red receipt. 2 hours later, she replied. Her message was short. "I didn't know. I swear. He told me you left him years ago." I didn't respond, because part of me believed her, and part of me didn't care. That same night, he came home late again. He tried to sneak in quietly, but I was waiting in the kitchen. "Long day?" I asked. He froze. "Yeah, back-to-back meetings." I smiled faintly. "Marriott meetings again?" His face twitched. Just slightly. Then he forced a laugh. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing," I said. "Just curious how the rewards program is going. You seem to rack up a lot of points." He stood there, confused, trying to figure out how much I knew. But I didn't give him the satisfaction. Instead, I handed him his coffee, kissed his cheek, and walked upstairs, leaving him standing there, the silence heavier than any accusation. Over the next week, he started acting nervous, checking his phone more often. leaving earlier for work. He must have sensed something. Maybe the other woman had confronted him. Maybe guilt was eating him alive. But I didn't care anymore, because the game was no longer about pain. It was about power, and I had all of it. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. The company's annual holiday dinner. It was a formal event at his office. Family and spouses invited. He hadn't asked me to go in years, but this time I got the invitation in my inbox directly, CC'd from HR. Apparently, someone forgot to remove my email from the list. So, I decided to attend. I wore my calmest smile, my best dress, and carried a small manila folder in my purse, the one labeled Tax Info 2023. When I arrived, I saw him across the room, chatting confidently with his boss. He didn't expect me. His face turned pale for half a second before he masked it with a grin. "Babe, you came," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "Of course," I said softly. "Wouldn't miss it." I mingled, shook hands, smiled for photos, all while my heart stayed ice cold, because I knew what was coming next. Midway through the dinner, the company CEO took the stage, thanking everyone for their hard work and honesty, and that's when I did it. I leaned toward his boss, smiled, and said quietly, "You might want to look into the Nashville travel reimbursements for your regional manager." Her eyebrows lifted. I slid the manila folder across the table, just enough for her to glimpse the first page, the company letterhead, the matching dates, the personal expenses charged to corporate cards. She didn't say a word, but I knew, right then, his world had just tilted. That night, as we drove home, he was silent. No music, no small talk, just his hands gripping the steering wheel. I watched him from the passenger seat, feeling nothing but calm satisfaction. He finally knew. I wasn't clueless anymore. He pulled into the driveway, turned off the engine, and said in a low voice, "What did you do?" I looked him straight in the eye. "I just told the truth." He swallowed hard, stared out the windshield, and whispered, "You don't know what you've done." "Oh, I do," I said softly. "You built your lies on my name. Now they're collapsing under yours." That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in years, because the plan wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. I'd taken back my voice, the one he'd silenced with his smooth lies and quiet guilt. And tomorrow, I was going to take back everything else. The morning after the company dinner, my phone buzzed nonstop. Text after text from him. Calls I didn't answer. He'd left early for work, but I knew he wouldn't be there long. Because when truth starts spreading inside a corporate building, it moves faster than gossip. By noon, the company's HR department had already reached out to me, politely, formally, asking if I could verify some financial discrepancies. I didn't have to say much. I just said, "Yes, I can confirm," and sent them the folder digitally. That was it. The match dropped. At 2:14 p.m., I got a message from an unknown number. "He's been terminated." I sat still for a long time after reading those words. No joy, no tears, just silence. The kind that comes after a storm when you realize everything has finally fallen. But this wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of his reckoning, because once he lost his job, the dominoes started to fall. He came home that evening, slamming the front door so hard the frame shook. His face was red, his tie loosened, and he was trembling with a mix of rage and panic. "You ruined me," he yelled. "Do you even understand what you've done?" I stood in the kitchen, calm as ever. "I understand perfectly," I said. "You ruined us. I just made sure people saw it. You had no right." "I had every right," I cut in, my voice cold and steady. "Because it was my money that paid for your lies. My name on those accounts. My life you gambled away." He stared at me, breathing hard. Then his voice broke. "What about the kids? You think this helps them?" "They'll thank me one day," I said quietly. "Because they'll know their mother didn't stay silent when she was betrayed." He didn't answer. He just turned away, pacing, muttering to himself. For the first time, he looked small. like a man shrinking inside his own skin. That night, he slept in the guest room. The silence between us was louder than any argument. The next morning, while he was out running errands, I met with my lawyer again. Karen was ready, calm, sharp, and efficient. She slid a stack of papers across the desk. Everything's in order. Divorce, custody, financial restitution. You'll get the college funds back. The court will see the proof of misuse. I flipped through the pages, each one like a quiet victory. When I reached the signature line, my hand didn't even shake. I signed. And in that moment, I felt a door inside me close. Permanently. When he came home later, I was packing boxes. He watched me, confused. "What are you doing?" "Moving forward," I said. "Where will you go?" "Somewhere peaceful." He laughed bitterly. "You can't just take everything." "I'm not," I said, still folding clothes. "Just taking what's mine, the kids, our peace, and the truth." He shook his head. "You'll regret this." I looked at him, really looked, and said, "No, you'll regret thinking I wouldn't." The next day I filed the papers. Then I made one last move, the one that would ensure no other woman would fall for his perfect act again. I logged into our old joint social account, the one he'd used to post family pictures and business events. And there, I wrote one simple post. To everyone who wondered why I stopped smiling, I finally found the receipts. Turns out my husband had a second family. With my money. The truth always comes home eventually. I attached one photo, not of him, not of her, but of me and our children, standing in front of the car we'd just bought under my name, smiling, free. I didn't disable comments. I didn't need to. Because truth, when it's real, doesn't need defending. By the end of the day, his entire circle knew. His coworkers, his friends, even his relatives from out of state. The perfect man image shattered like glass, loud, final, impossible to fix. The confrontation that followed was quick and ugly. He begged, then threatened, then cried. All the stages of a man losing control. At one point, he grabbed my arm, desperate. "We can fix this," he said. I looked at him steadily. "You had years to fix it. You chose her instead." He dropped my arm like it burned him. Then, without another word, he walked out. That was the last night he ever slept under my roof. Days turned into weeks. Court hearings, bank paperwork, custody mediation, all of it blurred together. But I showed up to every meeting calm, clear, and steady. Because now, I wasn't reacting to him anymore. I was building something new. Karen called one afternoon with the final update. "He's forfeited the joint assets to avoid trial," she said. "The judge approved full custody. The college fund is being reinstated." I closed my eyes, exhaled slowly. Freedom doesn't always feel like fireworks. Sometimes it feels like peace. A few days later, he showed up one last time, just to drop off some boxes and say goodbye to the kids. I stayed on the porch, watching from a distance. He hugged them, whispered something, and then turned to me. For a brief second, I saw regret in his eyes. Maybe even shame. "Take care of them," he said softly. "I always have," I replied. And with that, he got into his car and drove away. I stood there, watching the taillights disappear into the distance, and realized I didn't hate him anymore. I just didn't care. That night, after I tucked the kids into bed, I sat in the quiet house, half empty but peaceful. I poured myself a glass of wine, opened the window, and listened to the sound of rain outside. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for anyone to come home, because I already was home. When everything finally came crashing down, silence filled the house louder than any argument ever could. The kids didn't ask questions at first. They just watched me pack boxes, fold clothes, and breathe like I was trying to remember how to do it again. I thought I'd feel rage forever. But after weeks of paperwork, court dates, and restless nights staring at the ceiling, the rage started to fade into something quieter. Exhaustion, maybe, or freedom disguised as emptiness. He had moved into a one-bedroom apartment near the city. At least that's what his lawyer said. I didn't care to see it. The kids didn't either. They'd stopped asking when he'd come home. Children understand more than we give them credit for. They saw the truth long before I had the courage to admit it. I found myself cleaning drawers, deleting his old voicemails, donating half the furniture that carried his scent. Each small act felt like reclaiming a piece of my own life. The first time I slept without checking his side of the bed, I cried. Not because I missed him, but because I didn't. The money part was messy. Lawyers, accountants, endless statements showing where my trust had been siphoned off one hotel at a time. But when the judge finally ruled in my favor, custody, the house, and the remainder of the college fund, I didn't feel victory. Just closure. I sat in that courtroom and realized I'd paid for his lies, yes, but I'd also bought my freedom. In the months that followed, I started rebuilding slowly. Mornings became gentler. Coffee tasted stronger. I learned to laugh again, not the polite kind you fake at dinner, but the full-bodied laugh that comes from somewhere honest. There were nights when loneliness crept in, but even then, it was mine. I wasn't afraid of being alone anymore. I was afraid of losing myself again. One Sunday, I took the kids on a spontaneous drive across the state. Windows down, music loud, snacks everywhere. Halfway through the trip, my daughter leaned from the back seat and said, "Mom, you look happy." And I was. That was the first time in years I realized I didn't need an apology to move on. I just needed peace. Now, when people ask how I survived, I tell them, I didn't just survive. I reclaimed what was always mine, my life, my laughter, and my choice to never fund someone else's deceit again. Some stories don't end with fireworks or grand revenge. Some just end quietly, with a woman finding herself again. I used to think strength meant staying, forgiving, holding a family together no matter how much it hurt. But now I know, real strength is walking away. Even when your knees shake. Every bill he hid, every lie he told, every trip I unknowingly paid for, it all bought me something far more valuable: clarity. These days, I wake up and the first thing I feel is peace. Not the kind you have to earn, but the kind that comes when you finally stop pretending. The house feels lighter, the air feels real again, and laughter, mine and my kids, fills every room like sunlight through open windows. If you're listening to this, and you've ever felt used, lied to, or left out of your own life, I want you to remember this. You can rebuild. You can reclaim. And one day you'll wake up and realize the pain didn't destroy you. It refined you. Because sometimes, losing everything you thought you needed is the only way to find who you truly are. Did you like my story? Please like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far this story of mine travels. And remember, peace doesn't come from keeping someone else's secrets. It comes from finally keeping your own promises.